Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Unemployment, the value-added tax, and price controls. This month on COPE Report, we will examine these issues in depth. On side one, background information especially for union officials.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Nat Goldfinger is the AFL-CIO's Director of Research. He is considered labor's top economist. Mr. Goldfinger views unemployment statistics as people with families, dreams, and shattered hopes. COPE Report asks him what can be done to put the 5 million unemployed back to work.
With unemployment at such very high levels, at the highest level in 10 years, what we need are job-creating measures which would not only create employment opportunities for the unemployed and for the new people coming into the labor force, but would also pump money into the economy in the places that it was needed, in the creation of public facilities and public services, and money into the hands of the unemployed in the form of wages.
Mr. Goldfinger, some of President Nixon's chief economic advisors say the reason there are more unemployed is because there are more people in the labor force.
There are more women, young people, there are more Negroes in the labor force, and what is needed here is to create jobs that those people can fulfill. We heard these same kinds of things back in the 1930s. If you read the records of the Depression of the 1930s, there were people around then, people in ivory towers and in bankers' offices and in foundation places, who sit back very well protected and very well guarded and tell other people, well, there may be a necessity for higher levels of unemployment, but they are not unemployed, their families are well taken care of, and frequently they also are the beneficiaries of these tax bonanzas that the administration has been handing out.
Well, Mr. Goldfinger, what rate of unemployment is acceptable?
I don't know that any level of unemployment is acceptable. If we are a rational society with a social objective, then the objective should be to reduce unemployment continuously to its lowest possible level, to provide education and training for the unskilled, while at the same time we provide jobs for the unskilled. I think it's utterly callous and utter disregard for family life and for human beings for academic and professional economists to sit back in their ivory towers and to say, well, we should be satisfied with a higher level of unemployment, not 3% unemployment, but 5%, the next time it's 6%.
From unemployment to taxes, the Nixon administration has a gimmick for everything. White House spokesmen are talking about instituting a value-added tax to increase federal revenues. In reality, this would be little more than a national sales tax. COPE Report asked Ray Dennison, one of the AFL-CIO's tax experts, how the value-added tax would work.
A value-added tax is now in use in Europe, and it is used wherein at every stage of the manufacturing process, a tax is added on the value that is added to the product as it goes through the production sequence. And so that it is possible, if a 3% value-added tax is leveled at the first step, by the time it gets through the 10th step, each successive processor has collected the tax from those he has sold it to, rebated it to those he has purchased the product from. And it's a very involved method of collecting taxes, and it's used in Europe primarily because in many countries there's great difficulty in collecting taxes. And thus, to ensure the collection of taxes, they've in effect put it on at every single processing step. In the United States, on the contrary, we have a very good record for tax collection, and for that reason alone, we do not need this kind of very complicated, involved tax on manufacturing processes.
Administration spokesmen say that this sales tax would be used to relieve the property tax burden on homeowners.
Unquestionably, property taxes have become a heavy burden to the individuals throughout the country, and it's a good political position to take to, in effect, suggest that we're going to relieve the local property owner of some of his tax burden. But again, if you're taking it, relieving him in one area, you're going to also tax him as he goes to the store and makes general purchases. You're going to be taxing him anywhere from 3 to 5% on top of whatever he is now paying in taxes, and that in itself could be as much as $200 per year for an average family. Now, if you get a property tax relief, I doubt if it will be in the excess of $200.
Mr. Dennison, what can be done in the area of tax reform to increase federal revenues?
tax-free bonds should be ended, foreign tax credits should be ended, the capital gains law should be ended, the estate and gift laws should be revised, and all of these are areas that have very heavy interest by the very wealthy and the large corporations. And our position has been that a tax reform in these areas alone could net an annual income of something like $15 billion a year, which would be about as much as a 4% national sales tax would collect.
On side 2 of this cassette, AFL-CIO Secretary-Treasurer Lane Kirkland talks straight to union members about price controls. For an update on the activities of the AFL-CIO Price Monitoring Program, COPE Report talked with Leo Perlis, the Director of Community Services.
We have in our offices, not only here in Washington but throughout the country, thousands upon thousands of reports on violations, price rises all over the lot, including parking lots, incidentally, food, gasoline, insurance policies, utilities, transportation, and many other areas. Many of these complaints have been filed with the Internal Revenue Service. Unfortunately, the complainants never hear anymore from the Internal Revenue Service, so that we really don't know what the IRS has done with our complaints. When we file them, that's the last we hear.
What should the IRS do about each complaint?
We insist that the IRS take on the responsibility of reporting to the complainant about the disposition of every case. I think the American people are entitled to know if they are called upon to participate. They are entitled to know what their complaints are all about when they reach the Internal Revenue Service, what happened with their complaints, whether they are right or wrong. Unless we do get that kind of a reporting system developed, the credibility of the government in this area and the credibility of the Internal Revenue Service is going to be destroyed.
Mr. Perlis told a television interviewer that the average consumer cannot determine violations of price controls.
Because of the confused rules and regulations of the Price Commission, it is impossible for the average consumer to determine whether or not a price increase is legal or not. He would really have to be a certified public accountant, familiar with all the records and all the books of every business to determine whether or not a rise in the price of an item is legally justified or not. The only thing he sees when he looks into the shelves are the rise in the cost of the items, and therefore, if he is concerned about it, as he should be, he therefore must file a complaint, and it's up to the IRS then to determine whether or not that complaint is justified or not. It isn't our purpose to flood the IRS, obviously, but it is our purpose to clarify the issues before the people.
Then Mr. Perlis told what the price monitors are trying to do.
Our job is to lower the cost of living. Our job is to keep the prices in line because we know that wages have always lagged behind prices. We're against inflation because it erodes our earning power, our dollar. So we have a stake in keeping prices down. If we were trying to sabotage the price control system, we would be sabotaging ourselves. But we need the help of a sensitive and responsive government, and we simply don't have that sensitive and responsive government. The price control system now, in effect, is neither firm nor fair.
What type of price control system is needed, Mr. Perlis?
The price control system, if there's going to be any system at all, has to be run fairly and firmly across the board. Now, that means that the people have got to know what happens to their complaints. Prices have to be frozen across the board. There have to be less exemptions. The people who are overcharged should receive restitution of their overcharges. And there should be penalties for violations. There are too many exemptions right now on some of the major items on the family budget, unprocessed foods, for example. If there are going to be effective controls, then some of these items should be frozen or controlled.
COPE Report continues on side 2 of this cassette with reports on the economy, taxes, prices, and George Corley Wallace. Side 2 is designed to be played at local union meetings.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
A vote for Wallace is a vote for Nixon, the enemy of labor.
The year 1971 closed out with 5,200,000 unemployed in December, the greatest number of unemployed in 10 years.
We will, if necessary, put picket lines in front of stores that refuse to play fair with their customers.
gonna roll, we're gonna roll, we're gonna roll the Union on. We're gonna roll, we're gonna roll, we're gonna roll the Union on.
This month on COPE Report, price controls that are a sham, unemployment rates that are a disgrace, and George Wallace, a candidate who would let Nixon continue this record.
We're gonna roll the Union on. We're gonna roll, we're gonna roll, we're gonna roll the Union on.
The Nixon administration's price control program is falling apart. At the same time, employers are rigidly enforcing wage controls. AFL-CIO Secretary-Treasurer Lane Kirkland recently talked about price controls and what they mean to union members.
Workers do not need a degree in economics to understand inflation, and a degree in economics should not be necessary to understand price controls. They know that inflation dilutes the value of their paychecks. They get their lessons at the supermarket from their landlords, and they get it every time they confront a cash register. For most workers, wages are the only source of family income, an income that must be stretched to pay for food, for clothing, for shelter, for medical care, for education, all of the real or potential needs of a family. And while the prices of all of these items have been going up, wages have been lagging behind. Despite the gains made at the collective bargaining table, wages continue to fall behind price increases.
The AFL-CIO is actively monitoring prices through many local central bodies.
We are putting monitors in the stores, as many as we possibly can, and we promise to bring every suspected price violation, every violation of price controls and rent controls that we can find to the attention of the IRS. As American citizens, we have the right to expect the government to quickly and efficiently check these complaints and to crack down hard on the violators. And we insist on knowing the disposition of each and every complaint.
But exemptions and loopholes are making the job of the price monitors more difficult.
Because the job is tougher doesn't mean that we should quit. We can and we should make life as tough as possible for the price gouger, the rent gouger, and the administration that seeks to protect them instead of protecting the consumer. Consumers should unite, should check out every store, look over every store on his shoulder, watches every price tag change. Renters should unite and oppose every rent hike that's not legitimate.
Consumers have one choice: to work together to demand effective price controls.
Together we can demand, loudly and clearly, that there be enforcement of price controls as long as they exist. The choice then will be up to the administration. It can admit that controls are a sham, or it can prove its good faith by enforcing price controls fairly, honestly, openly, and completely. So we are going to report violations, every single one we suspect, and we will report them by the freight car load if necessary, because they have left us with absolutely no alternative, not because we want to do it that way. We will help tenants to fight unjustified rent increases. We will, if necessary, put picket lines in front of stores that refuse to play fair with their customers, refuse to cooperate.
We're gonna roll, we're gonna roll, we're gonna roll the Union on. We're gonna roll, we're gonna roll, we're gonna roll. We're gonna roll the Union on.
President Nixon has been in office for 3 years now, and the effect on the economy has been disastrous. First, there was the game plan, and then the freeze, and now phase 2. Nat Goldfinger, Organized Labor's top economist, reviews the economic situation. First, unemployment.
The year 1971 closed out with 5,200,000 unemployed in December, the greatest number of unemployed in 10 years. And this is a very serious problem that hangs over the American economy and American society. And there is nothing in the works and nothing implied in even the fairly favorable, optimistic forecasts that would indicate much of a dent, if any, in this serious unemployment problem.
When President Nixon was candidate Nixon, he campaigned against inflation. What's his record for 1971?
The Consumer Price Index for 1971, it's up about 4.5% from 1970. That's better than last year's record of 1970 when it was up 5.9, or the 5.4% record of 69. But it's awfully high, and it's higher than the 68 record when retail prices were up over 4%, and when there was so much difficulty and so much trouble over the rise in prices and the inflation of 1968. We still have an inflationary situation.
The president continues to say that 1972 will be a good year for the economy. COPE Report asked Mr. Goldfinger, Good for whom?
The lion's share of any growth in the economy in 1972, assuming that those forecasts are right, would be going to business and to wealthy families because there's a massive shift in income distribution underway in American society at present.
When the Union's inspiration through the workers' blood shall run, there can be no power greater anywhere beneath the sun. For no force on earth is weaker than the feeble strength of one, but the Union makes us strong.
President Nixon's gimmick-laden tax program has been passed by Congress. To find out what it means for the individual taxpayer, Cope Report talked with Ray Dennison, an AFL-CIO tax expert.
It means very little, actually, in relation to how much it means for the corporation. As a matter of fact, the average family of four will receive under this legislation a tax cut of about 36 cents a week for 1971 and slightly over $1 a week in 1972, and nothing more than that thereafter. Actually, the biggest benefit the average individual will get from this bill is should he buy an automobile, and then he no longer pays the automobile excise tax.
The Nixon administration may have a new tax gimmick for 1972.
It's our belief that the Nixon administration will now seek in 1972 another tax package which will include a national sales tax, or as it will be called, a value-added tax. And this value-added tax will fall very heavily, again, on the average income earner because it will be a sales tax on top of whatever sales tax he is now paying.
The Nixon administration may label a national sales tax as an education tax or a peace tax to gain support for it.
It will take a great deal of Madison Avenue gimmickry to sell it to the average American, but no matter how it is disguised, nor no matter how it is packaged, it nonetheless is a sales tax, and it would probably cost the average sales tax of about 3%, would cost the average family about $200 a year, and that's the equivalent of cutting the personal exemptions for a family of four down from the $750 level down to about $500. So that in effect a family of four would lose the personal exemption totaling of about $1,000.
Solidarity forever, for the Union makes us strong.
George Wallace is running for president again. National Cope Director Al Barkin examines the Wallace campaign and points to some hard figures that show Wallace could decide who will win in 1972, even though he can't win.
About this time in 1968, we warned our leaders and members of the impact of the Wallace vote on the presidential election. We emphasized over and over again that a vote for Wallace would only help Nixon. Our worst fears came to pass. Let's look at some figures in 5 states. In California, Nixon won by 225,000 votes. The Wallace vote was 480,000. In Illinois, Nixon's margin was 130,000. The Wallace vote, 385,000. In Missouri, Nixon only won by 21,000 votes, while Wallace's vote in that state was 205,000. In New Jersey, the Nixon margin was 60,000. Wallace vote, 262,000. In Ohio, Nixon won by 92,000 votes. Wallace received 468,000.
Mr. Barkin told Cope Report how the Wallace vote in these states affected the 1968 election.
These 5 states have an electoral vote of 121. Nixon won the election of 1968 by only 111 votes. Wallace boasts that he was responsible for Nixon being in the White House. On November the 9th, 1971, speaking in Atlanta, and I quote, Wallace said, "Our movement was effective enough to defeat Mr. Humphrey for the presidency of the United States." End quote. It sure was. And it'll happen again if we're not alert to the Wallace danger. In 1972, Wallace has already started.
Finally, Mr. Barkin points to the Wallace danger in 1972.
The Wallace danger in 1972 is a real one. Don't wait until it's too late. Every member must be alerted to the Wallace danger. Every member must be asked to vote their hopes and not their fears. Wallace is a spoiler. A vote for Wallace is a vote for Nixon, the enemy of labor.
For another view of the Wallace campaign, Cope Report went down south to talk with its Texas correspondent.
Folks, you know there's a lot of surprising things about Richard Nixon, but the most surprising one to me is how little gratitude he has. Do you know he ain't thanked George Wallace till this day for what George Wallace done for him back in 1968? You remember back there, Nixon was a-running against Hubert Humphrey and George Wallace was a-running on the third party. And you remember that Richard Nixon just barely squeezed through to beat Humphrey. Well, a whole lot of good, honest, hard-working friends of mine voted for George Wallace when their votes ought to have gone to where they belonged. Then, of course, Humphrey would have won, and we wouldn't have got ourselves saddled with Richard Nixon. But as it was, George Wallace drained them votes off, and Richard Nixon got in. But has Richard Nixon called George Wallace up on the White House phone? Has he said, "Thank you so much, George, you done me a great favor. You know, I'd have never made it to the front gates of that White House, let alone got a 4-year lease on the place, if it hadn't have been for you, George Wallace. Thank you so much for running." No. I'm telling you, Richard Nixon ain't got no gratitude. Now, they tell me that he's a-charging up his batteries and a-revving up his motor, getting all set for another race this year. And bless goodness, if George Wallace ain't a-talking the same way, gonna do Dick another favor. And there's a lot of oddballs, you know. They've got a fourth party and a fifth party candidates that they're talking about. But let me tell you about my friends. They've done learned their lesson. It ain't a-gonna work this year. Voting for Wallace or any other odd party man might be a big favor to Dick Nixon. But the working folks of this country done know that Dick Nixon ain't no favor to them. And so they ain't gonna vote for no odd party people this year. They're gonna vote her straight.
Solidarity forever.
This has been Cope Report for February 1972. Next month, more up-to-the-minute information on politics, taxes, the economy on Cope Report.